Hey, no shitters. Matt and Eric from the No Shit Cast here. We got a great podcast coming up for you with Dr. Paul Young, who's an educator and a historian. Music history, right, Eric?
Yes.
Yes, and I think he's a trombone player. It's really interesting. Anyway, great interview with him. I actually learned a lot about education and sort of education techniques because he trains educators. So absolutely, you should stick around and listen. When you get the chance, we'd like you to go over to the xfactory.com. That's our buddy Tangent's website where we host No Shitcast from. Again, the xfactory.com, the letter X, and then the word factory.com. Go over and check out some of the stuff that Tangent's got going on over there. Check out the noshitcast.com. That's where we host from. And go check out our website. And if you like what you hear here and would like to help us support continuing to host over at the X Factory with our friend Tangent, there's a donation button down at the bottom of the page. You can go down there and click on that and make a donation to support the noshitcast.com. The X Factory's Prodigy Collaborative Project is designed to help support the three parties involved in helping to bring a special CDR multimedia project to life. Donations are split equally three ways between a featured content provider, artist, a graphic designer, and the xfactory.com. Also, feel free to visit the xfactory.com/donate and check out the fundraising home where you can help the xfactory.com's creative do-it-yourself and do-it-together community endeavor. Help the xfactory.com via PayPal to meet its annual donation goal by sending, number one, general donations, two, donations to directly support the hosting for members like us, the noshitcast.com, donations to receive a general gift, donations to receive a Prodigy Collaborative product, CDR, created by a featured content providers, a graphic designer, and the xfactory.com. So, who do we got coming up on the show there, Mr. Smith?
Well, we have on March 31st, a recording date with Dr. Nevin to talk about American history and his journey on his doctorate. And then you will hear that actually on the 1st of April. On the 7th of April, we're going to talk to Lauren Curtis, and then you'll be able to access that conversation. On the 8th of April, she is a visual artist, and we will be talking about those matters. On the 14th of April, me and you are going to talk about something that we decide to talk about, if we decide to talk about anything in particular at all. But we'll be talking, just you and me, hanging out, talking.
That'd be cool. We haven't done just a you and me podcast in a while.
No. Yep. It's going to be so exciting, for sure. And you'll be able to listen to it on the 15th of April. And then on the 21st of April, we're going to be talking with Judy Nevin, who is a children's author and the head of the Ohio University Lancaster Branch Library. And you'll be able to access that conversation on the 22nd of April.
Very cool. All right, no shitters. Dr. Paul Young on deck. Check it out. Hello out there, and welcome to the No Shit Cast, flagship podcast of the X Factory Creative Network. My name is Matt Fraser. I'm your host. Today's guest, Dr. Paul Young, joining us in the studio for a discussion about higher education and rock and roll music. My guest host, as usual, the gray wizard of historical knowledge himself, Mr. Eric D. Smith. How you doing tonight, Eric?
I am doing very well, thank you.
Very nice. So, very special event here. Another in-studio guest, the way we actually, kind of prefer to do it because of the sound quality. Dr. Young, how you doing today?
I'm great. Nice to be here.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to come in and talk to us.
You're welcome.
So the sort of the thing we do here is we like to explore people that are passionate about subjects. Have them come in and tell us their story, things like that. So we always start with this. Where did it begin for you in your sort of passion for both music and then deciding to get into teaching education and becoming someone that trains educators?
And what came first for you? Was it the music and then later the education, or?
The music came first, and when you ask this question, it makes me think back many, many years. I grew up on a farm in east of Bremen, and it was a family farm. We had the young farm had been given to my great grandfather, probably as payment for his service in the Revolutionary War. It was part of that deal back then, that if you were a serviceman or a soldier, you were given land in what was Northwest Territory at the time, and he came out with his young bride in 1800 here in Rush Creek Township and settled that farm. So it'd been in the family since that time.
Wow.
Well, my dad was the only son of about 6 girls, and then he was the youngest. And of course, he became the farmer. They all went off to college and did other things. He stayed home and was the farmer. Would have been on that farm as a very young man during the World War II. And at that time, I learned, as you talk about those things, that he didn't get drafted to go serve in the war like a lot of his buddies in high school did, because they were keeping farmers at home to provide essentials that we all needed to fight the war. Well, about the time that it would have ended, he was getting ready to go. They thought he was still going to go, and the war ended. Then he met my mother and stayed on the farm. Well, I have an older brother and a younger brother and a sister. I'm the second. And, farming to me was, I look back, I could probably have done it. My older brother was obviously the one that got to drive the tractors and do all the work. And I was younger and not as big, so I couldn't. And I think he and I have always been rather competitive because of that. But my mother was the one that had some musical background. Oh, okay. Her family is Welsh. Matter of fact, she's a cousin to Bob Evans.
Oh, neat. Oh, wow.
Yeah, Bob Evans restaurant. Distant cousin, I think, probably. But anyway, the Welsh have a long history of singing and singing songs. And I think maybe that gene comes from that, probably. So, as a young person growing up, obviously there was music in the home because of her. I guess I was inclined to go in that direction versus farming.
Well, I got to ask you a question because
go ahead.
Was there is this a word, epiphanous moment? Was there a moment, because this is what happened. This happened to me, and I often wonder about people that grew up on farms and then take radically sort of different career paths. Because I can tell you almost to the year that I was standing on a hay wagon throwing bales of hay when I went, I'm not doing this shit for the rest of my life. Like, I knew at that moment this was not happening. And I got nothing against being farmers.
No, I'm
super lazy. That's what it is. Okay, I avoid manual labor like the plague.
Well, like now I know the benefits of all the values that I learned growing up on the farm have stayed with me all that time. I can't think of any moment.
Absolutely, by the way. Yeah, the value system and the work ethic and all that does stick with you.
It's the work ethic, perhaps more than anything. But as Eric sent me a question to prepare for, what happened in elementary school. I loved to sing. I was always in all the programs. I was fascinated by my music teacher, Mrs. Sapp was her name, because she could play the piano so well, and I wanted to be able to do that. My mother played the piano. She tried to teach me. That didn't work very well. Parents trying to teach their children something like that just doesn't go. And she gave up on me. And so I...
You mean just the piano? She didn't
on the piano,
all right.
So
you're out, kid.
So I ended up doing the trombone and was able to play that. But one of the biggest regrets in my life is that I didn't learn to play the piano at that very young age. So that was, and of course, what did I need as a music teacher? Probably what instrument most would be the piano. And then, so anyway, I went to Fairfield Union High School, and Bob Trocchia was my band director at the time, and he's been an icon in the world of music in Fairfield County forever. And I was fascinated by him and enthralled by him, and sort of wanted to do what he did. And so when it came time to graduate from high school, it was either follow your brother's footsteps to Ohio State and be a farmer, or study agriculture or something, or I was able to just branch out on my own. My dad didn't like that. He I think probably had in his mind that he would have 3 sons to take over the farm. So I went, and when it got into OU, which was the first person in the Young family ever went to Ohio University, everybody had gone to Ohio State. And OU had the reputation then, sort of like it has now. You're going down to that party school and all of
Yeah, to be clear, this is Ohio University in Athens, Ohio, which is, I don't even think is allowed to compete anymore for party college, because they're just given like an honorary
I think so.
place. Yeah.
But anyway, we would argue all the way down from Bremen to Athens about there's no career in this. What do you think you're doing? And all this. And but I didn't come home very often. Because I just didn't want to have to put up with that. I found myself in Athens in the School of Music, and found my people that were doing the same kind of things that I was doing for the same reasons, and
sort of found your tribe.
Yeah, I did. I found my tribe. That's a good way to say that. So finally, when I was a senior in college, I invited my family to come to a concert. This was in May of the year that I guess I would have been a senior. I was going to graduate. And the band or the orchestra or whatever was performing a concert, and he came with my mom and my sister, and afterwards, going back to the car, back through the School of Music, he said to me, "Well, that wasn't too bad." And then he goes home that evening and gets on a tractor, and it flips over and kills him instantly.
Oh, you got to be kidding me.
No, but he had at least he had seen what I was doing, and he apparently, in his own way, was able to figure out, that it was going to be okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
So my world was obviously turned upside down, as well as my siblings, and especially my mother. And
how old were you then?
I was a senior in college, so I was 22, and probably had at that point about a month to go. We were on quarter system, so we would have probably not finished them sometime in June. And my professors there, that tribe, rallied around me. I was reflecting on this several weeks ago about how did I get from graduate? How did I even get to graduation? Because it's a blur. I don't remember. I mean, I went through it, but can't remember because it was less than a month after he'd had that accident. And how my mother survived it, how my siblings survived it, because my youngest brother was on the tractor with him. He was standing on the back. They were trying to pull a cow out of a ditch and on a hill, and it just flipped over. And my younger brother was able just to jump off and get out of the way. But my dad was a big man and not very mobile, and got him right away.
Yep.
So anyway, somehow those professors must have figured out that I needed to stay there for another year, and they helped me get into the master's program. I don't remember how I did it, how I applied, but they must have done it for me.
Wow.
So I was thinking I was going to go on a 2-year program working with Tom Lee, who was the band director at that point, as kind of an assistant to him as a grad assistant. And then after the first year, he decided he was going to go to the University of Texas. He says, "Come with me." Well, I wasn't really ready just to abandon my family at that point. I mean, Athens isn't that far from the farm on Bremen, so even though I was, not there, I was close by if I needed to be.
Right.
And I thought about it, and I just couldn't see myself going there. My wife, we were dating seriously at that time. She's a year younger than me, so I guess we probably knew we would be married soon, and that would complicate the matter. At the same time, then Bob Trocchia, my band director, approached me somehow, I guess probably called me or whatever, and said, because he was doing both the choir and the band at the high school for years, and he just didn't want to do the band anymore. And he said, "How would you like to be the band director? I'll do the band, or I'll do the choir, you do the band, and we'll work together." I never interviewed. He had enough clout and enough power that he made that happen.
Right.
Wow.
I think I met the superintendent sometime later, probably in October, but there I was.
And
so I went
suddenly a whole new life, kind of.
And back to my high school, to that high school that I said I will never come back to.
Right.
But as the band director, and at that point, the Fairfield Union Band was probably one of the best around. I mean, it was huge. The kids were tremendous. Family support was tremendous. It was a great place to be. I was a little afraid, perhaps, that I would be teaching kids that I knew, but after 5 years, the ones I was there with high school, they were gone, and it was a new crew and a lot of new people that I didn't know.
Right.
Thinking back, it was the most wonderful experience, how blessed I was to be able to start my teaching career in that situation, but also to have my mentor across the hallway helping anytime I would falter as that young teacher. So I did that for 11 years. And being a marching band director, particularly, is a young man's job. That's especially at the pace that I went. And I was more interested in pursuing other parts of education. And that's about the same time that the doctoral program and all those things were coming into play. So I retrained. So I actually at OUL, where I'm teaching now, I retrained there and was able to pick up what I needed to become just an elementary teacher. So my family and I were living in Bremen. We had 2 young daughters at the time. I was able to get a 4th grade teaching position right across the street from my house. I didn't have to take any keys, nothing, to school. I could walk across the house. It was 99 steps to the front door of the school. And I taught 4th grade for 2 years, and then by that time had my principal's license. And after, so I guess 13 years in the business, became a principal in Perry County in a little town called Glenford for a year. And then I was asked then after a year there to come to Lancaster. So I served for nearly 20 years as an elementary principal in Lancaster at Sanderson, Medill, and finished at West School.
Wow.
In Lancaster. So, but always still feeling like, hey, I got to have my fingers in music somehow. For the longest time, my family and I was the choir director at the Bremen United Methodist Church. My daughters were the organist for me until I went off to college. Somewhere along the line, I guess it was 1982, so I'd been in it about 10 years. I was having lunch one day in Athens with my original music theory professor, who probably got me on the right track with, this is what you're going to have to do, young man, if you're going to study, if you're going to stay in this program, if you're going to succeed. This is what you have to do. His name is Dr. Jim Stewart. He was like I said, the music theory teacher. But by this time, after about 10 to 12 years, he had become the dean of the School of Music. I had no idea that he was dealing with this issue that he starts talking about during lunch. Actually, he was on a real rant. The guy that was coming from Athens to teach the music classes at the Lancaster campus of OUL was apparently alcoholic, drug problems, is an exhibitionist because he would go through the drive-ins of local restaurants with no clothes on after class. And I don't mean to be saying that facetiously against that, because he's passed away obviously since that time, but it was just fact. And he's going on this rant and about telling me this, which I'm wondering, why is he? Then he stopped about halfway through his rant and he says, "How would you like a job?" And what was that? What would it be? Teach those classes at OUL. What at that point was music classes that potential elementary teachers needed to be certified in teaching music. So okay. I thought, wow. And again, a job fell in my lap that I never really asked for, but I said, okay. And I started teaching there in 1982. After I was doing my regular day job of being a principal or being a teacher or whatever, I was able to do a 4 o'clock evening class once a week. And it was wonderful because I got to work with older students in addition to working with the youngest students during the day. So I did that for, lots of years until I finally retired from being a principal. Actually, it was after it was not until 2012. The university switched from quarters to semesters in 2012, so the curriculum was all designed differently. And this class called the History of Rock and Roll was being developed. And I was, of course, teaching there, and the associate dean at that time came to me and says, "How would you like to teach this class called the History of Rock and Roll?" Well, who would say no to that?
Right.
Yeah. Oh, twist my arm.
So I said yes, but knowing though that I didn't have a very good background in what the content would be. So I did a lot of reading, a lot of research, and relived the whole time of my life that all this was being developed.
That must have been fun.
It was fun, and it's still fun. That's why I still continue to do it. The kids that I have right now are Generation Z. That means they were born, the kids on our campus, most of the kids there are born after, say, 1995 particularly. Most of them even younger than that. So a current 18-year-old was born around 2000. It's hard to believe.
I know,
it is.
nuts.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And so to them, all of this is history.
Right.
And a lot of it is a study of the baby boom generation, which, is being born in 1950. I was 5 years into that, or 4 or 5 years into that, at the front end pretty much of the baby boom generation, having no idea really as a young person going through it, just what my generation was doing to change society. Just,
But change the world.
And culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, but particularly, here's an example. When we started arriving when my group, 1950, when we started arriving in schools around 1940, 54, 55, there were so many of us. There weren't enough classrooms, so that nobody had been watching it close enough to watch the amount of births that were starting to occur in hospitals. And so when we started to register, our parents would take us to school when they realized they got full and here comes more down the sidewalk. What are we going to do with these kids? They were finding ways to, put classes in gymnasiums and then eventually you started to see all the additions being put onto the buildings that were already there.
Yeah.
And of course, most of those have now been torn down and replaced by new ones. So that was one thing. The kids don't understand what an allowance is anymore. I talked to them, about, well, I got paid if I would clean my room. I'd get a quarter maybe. And if you had a quarter in your pocket, which when you think about it also, my parents didn't have that. They were, my parents were either home supporting the war effort from that perspective, or their peers were overseas, fighting to save our way of living. So they didn't have allowances when they were kids. And my mother and my father grew up during the Depression where it was nothing. So here I am now in a young generation where peace, we're the most prosperous country in the world. I guess they wanted to give us something that they had never had themselves. So you get this quarter in your pocket, or 50 cents in your pocket, and it's burning a hole.
Sure.
So then you realize, hey, I can go buy a record. I can get a 45 record. And I did that. Even though I was not necessarily cued into all the things about the history of rock and roll that I know now,
right?
You'd buy those records and you'd go home and you'd play them, or you'd get yourself a transistor radio. All those were the fad in the 60s. You'd have a transistor radio. So when I was out there on those wagons baling hay, I always had my transistor radio with me, and I always had my earplugs in, and I was always listening to that. And my dad probably thought I was completely nuts because he wouldn't listen to it. There was nothing he would listen to. Trying to get the kids to understand the different values, the different ways of how we were influenced by things that were happening around us by each generation is something that is a piece of the discussion of rock and roll that I think is important. Also, it's important that I think they understand that this has been driven, and our culture is driven by a constant competition between a conservative point of view on things and a liberal point of view on things. And maybe in some cases a socialist view on things, but more in this country, that constant rub between conservative and liberal values. And even though rock and roll may come across as something that people would think is a very liberal movement, it's not. It's both.
Yeah.
It's both. When you look at what the conservatives in this country would value, there's a lot of that in rock. There's a lot of that in rock and roll. There's a lot of that in our culture, and there's a lot then obviously that liberals would want to do. In my classes right now, we're preparing in another 2 weeks to have a debate on 20 issues of this. So we were this past week just talking about culture, American culture, and I gave them some examples about do we in this country want to have the best of whatever there is in the world. For instance, do we want to have the best cars? Do we want to have the best movies? Do we want to have the best food? Do we want to have the best clothes, music, art? And believe it or not, this is what concerned me a little bit. I think there was a good element of that class that didn't really care.
Right.
That we are the best. They think that's an ego. I see your little sign over that says no ego. And that prompted me to think they think if we do that, it's sort of the make America great thing. If we do that, then that we are arrogant and we're better than everybody else, and that will cause us problems. And there was another half of the class obviously says, oh no. We need to be the very, very best.
So there's that friction right there in your classroom.
Yeah, I said to them, would it bother you if you opened up your computer someday and it asked you for your Russian password or your Chinese password? One kid said, well, not bothering me any, and they're not coming down my street yet.
But once things change,
Well,
they
anyway.
wouldn't be very good with change, I don't think.
So the word that we learned, and it was a new word for them, was called jingoism. And in my study of this for preparation for this course, I found that word one time in discussing, true true nationalistic spirit, and it parallels with the nationalism that comes eventually into the discussion of rock and roll. What happened in England compared to what happened in the United States, what happened in other countries of the world, how they all started to to get on board with this movement because they all wanted to be a part of it.
Yep.
They all wanted that American culture.
Yep.
But it's trying to give that historical perspective to the kids, because after all, this is a history class.
Yep.
Even though it's about music, it's a history class. I think sometimes they think they're just going to get in there and come in for a semester, just listen to songs all day long. That's not the way it is. But so they were learning about jingoism, which is actually a British word. It's a shortcut for by Jesus. The Brits would never say that, so they would just say by jingo instead. And it was their reaction to the Russians. Interesting how it all comes back.
Them damn Russians every time.
Well, but I mean, when I was teaching that to the kids, it was
get blamed for everything.
It was about 2 days after the Russians had tried to poison somebody in Britain. So I mean, it was a current thing, and I think that
alleged Russians had tried to poison someone. Isn't that the right way you got to say it?
But you also
air quotes,
and it also comes right on the heels of a discussion of the music of Bruce Springsteen, which, in the way we have our class structured, rock and roll, what they call the history of rock and roll 1, or the first class, goes from about the mid-50s after World War II until about 1980. And then 1980 on would be another class, which I don't think has been taught on our campus. But
There's not. You haven't taught the second one? I
no,
thought I'd seen it in the catalog.
It's been there, but it never got. Nobody ever. I was never signed up to teach it, but it was never. It was there, but nobody. I don't think it ever got enough enrollees. Anyway, when you talk about Bruce Springsteen, his music and Born in the USA and those songs, about how you try to explain the end of the Vietnam War. We talk about the Vietnam War, obviously, in the 60s and 70s, during protest movements. But then after that winds down and all those soldiers come home in the 70s and how they were mistreated and, not given no respect for what they had done, Bruce Springsteen comes along with his music and Born in USA, and it is a very jingoistic type of music. And so anyway, the kids are listening to that, and so I posed that question, and I asked them, do you want to live in a world, particularly in America, if you're an American, do you want to live in a world where we have the best of everything or not? And half the class did not care. I said, how would you like then to be a Canadian? How would you like to be a native Canadian living up there, looking down here and seeing what this country has done and continues to do? Would you be envious? And I don't think they could comprehend that.
Yeah, it's different though. It absolutely is. I got kids in college and finishing up high school and stuff, and driver's license, don't care. Don't even care. I don't care. I don't know about you guys, but man, I was.
Yeah, I got mine at 17. I was ready to have
No, I mean the day I turned 16, I was like at the DMV going, "Give me my plastic." Right? Kids no, not concerned. They just, I don't think that they find fulfillment in the things anymore that we found fulfillment in. For instance, a car meant freedom. A car meant being able to go to your buddy's house and get away. Right now, they just put on headphones and jump on a computer and they're gone.
That's also the same way with, like you were talking about, an allowance and getting money for doing jobs and stuff. Now there's such immediate gratification with people who are able to pirate stuff off of the internet, be that movies or music, and most of the people I know do that. And
so there's not this need now to go out or to even
it's
go
all immediate
anywhere.
gratification. You can get games, you can get movies, you can get music. There's no reason to go and mow somebody's yard next door because for money. But when I was a kid, I mowed 2 or 3 yards and walked 6 miles into Paris, Texas to buy a tape. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
a cassette tape.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
considered myself lucky that I had the jobs to get the money. You know,
Right.
but today you don't even need that. You just
It's
get it on the
different.
computer
You-
and you download it and you got it.
I've been to Paris, Texas.
Have you?
I didn't know you were there.
God, I lived there for 6 years in Paris, Texas, and Powderly, Texas.
Yeah, and
Did some consulting work there when I
Really?
was principal. In
That's
Paris,
crazy.
yeah. Or
young
maybe it was after school work. Anyway,
I think young people. I think you're right. I think young people, especially, get myself in trouble here, but I don't think that they have the same value. And this is what's freaking older, like.
But how can
us
they?
out.
How can they?
And that's exactly right. But they certainly don't value things at the certain things at the levels that we do, and then our parents did. I mean, look now. It's because when I was coming out of the military and everything and looking for a career, and then it was get the house and get the, there was all these mile markers. These people were buying tiny homes. Like they don't care. It's just, does it keep me dry, warm, cool, good?
you're probably describing exactly how my father probably thought about me.
And that's the yeah. We talked about that too. Every generation.
He
looks
probably
at,
looked at me and thought, "Oh my
Yep.
God, what do I do? How do I raise this young man
Yep.
to be 18 years old? How's he going to go off and screw up his life?" But I have faith in this generation
Yeah.
that they're going to be. I already can see, even though the first wave is now coming in colleges, they're different than the millennials.
Yep.
They're more practical. They're very well educated, even though they
more focused.
And well read. They don't mind looking something up.
well, if it's on Wikipedia or something like
Exactly.
that. Here's
Yeah.
here's what a Generation Z person will do. They don't mind looking it up, but if they have to click about 3 times, they're done.
Th're done. Yeah. Too much.
If they can't find it on the first click, they're not going to go any deeper than that.
But that makes it easy to find pleasure. I can't even say the word. Plagiarism.
Plagiarism.
Yeah.
Woo.
I was
Hardest thing I did today.
about 5. Well, it's been more than 5 years ago, probably. Well, it's about the time we switched from semester or quarters to semesters. I remember going home one night and telling my wife, "I think I'm getting too old to do this because I can't get these kids to act like they care about anything.
Right.
They sit there in class and they're blah." Unless you get somebody like Eric, when he came into my class, being older and knowing that he wanted to learn. He wanted to, like a sponge, wanted to soak everything up. But you get the other kids, the ones that are 18 or 19 years old, that don't know what they want to do yet. They've been conditioned to just sit and get all their time in school. And I'm trying to teach them something like rock and roll that they should be interested in. I just sit there and see this stare, or they'd have their hand in their face, and they look like they were about ready to go to sleep.
Yeah, you're not teaching trig. You're teaching rock and roll.
But it was just that was what I was seeing from the kids, and that would just really honk me off.
Yeah.
I mean, I would just get really short. I'd get sarcastic. I would be not happy with myself. So I went home and of course started talking to some colleagues around the country that I respected a lot, and I realized that they didn't know what was really honking me off. I hadn't really told them. And I don't know if you remember, Eric, but when you took a class with me, if the very first day, I spend most of it just explaining what a work ethic is, what I want to see, what my expectations are, what's going to, if you come in this classroom, if the class starts at 3:30, if you're there at 3:31, I'm going to be honked off at you the whole period, and you're not even going to know it, but I'm going to be honked off.
Yeah.
And on with a list of things like that. Your attitude, your competence. I mean, I expect you to be able to read and write. And in my class, right. I also expect you to speak as a professional. That means you're not going to go like, or or whatever.
And in terms of emails, too.
Yes. So we go through all of that. Well, about 85% of the kids get it. I may have, out of class of 20, I may have 1 or 2 that say, "I'm not messing with that old man, I'm out of here." And they go off and do something else, which is fine. That's better off if they didn't have to, change if they don't want to. But most of the kids will get it. And I won't let them wear a hat in my class. I'm old-fashioned maybe, but maybe that's in reference to an old tradition with the King of England. If you were in the presence of the king, you couldn't wear a hat. So, you don't. So anyway, most of the kids get it. So I usually have a whole lot less trouble with absenteeism or tardiness compared to other professors as I talk to them. largely because I've set that expectation. I think that's a good thing for Generation Z, that they will respond if they're told. I think that's one thing that we sometimes forget to do, is for those of us that are older, is to lay out those expectations. I don't mind them challenging those expectations, but they better have a pretty good reason for why, they can't do it. So the one thing they will challenge me on is, well, why do I have to come to class all the time? Because if you're going to get a job, you've got to go to work on time.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Especially in education.
Well, yeah, any job. I said, well, does your boss care if you come in 2 or 3 minutes late every day? What would happen? Well, they'd fire me. I said, well, exactly. This is practice for that.
Yeah, consider it. Yeah.
So people call me all the time on because they know I'm from this area and I know everybody that's they were going through school out there. They say, well, what's this person like? And if I can say that they've never missed a class, they're never late, they don't care about the rest of the stuff about that's what an employer wants to see. So anyway, we're probably way off topic of talking about rock and roll, but talking about rock and roll is talking about life.
Yeah.
And
well, you were talking about nationalism.
Well, these are all important
right?
things too. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more about the state of the current youth. And I don't blame them specifically for it, because it's a matter of technology and culture as well. But it's we also talked about grit too. Getting half of getting anything done is showing up and starting to do it.
Eric, you bring up a topic that's very dear to my heart right now, and it's the whole concept of grit and mindset. And
let's talk about that a little bit.
They
need to hear this.
All right, so here's how I got into my grit kick. I was at a principals conference. Along the way, as being a principal, I was elected to serve as president of the National Elementary Principals Association, so I got to travel all over the country, meet a lot of people. I met a presenter. He owned a company in New Hampshire called Staff Development for Educators. His name is Jim Grant. He was about 10 years older than me, but he was just he was Mr. New Hampshire liberal, but yet brilliant guy. He knew how to deal with any audience. He and I were sitting in a hotel in Baltimore, Maryland one night, and I was talking to him about, I said, this young group of kids don't understand anything about professionalism. They don't know how to present themselves in such a way that any potential employer would ever notice them. They're just part of the group. They don't know how to market themselves in any way. And if they start something, they don't finish it. They don't understand how important it is to get the job done, to get it done on time. And he agreed. We started talking about it, and we started coming up with all ways we thought we could teach that concept. And along the way, a lot of the people in the country were coming up with it also. Angela Duckworth out of Pennsylvania, the University of Pennsylvania, is probably the authority on that whole concept right now of grit. Coming out of Stanford University in California about the same time was Carol Dweck's work on mindset, which is probably even better for teaching this whole thing to kids than the concept of grit, because mindset is an example. If you have a fourth grader and you tell that fourth grader, you're good in math, you're really good in math, and the kid starts to believe it, then they go to the fifth grade and they find out somebody else comes in that knows more about that than they do, and then all of a sudden their ego has been shot, and they shut down. And they said, well, they think then, well, I'm not good in math. I can't tell you how many times I ask kids at OUL, I said, are you good in math? And they'll say, no, I don't like it at all. They've already developed a fixed mindset that they don't think they can learn that. So they've shut down and they've quit. And I think a lot of times, because they have seen kids that go off to other campuses, they somehow develop that whole self-concept that I'm not as good as somebody else.
Right.
But that, in my opinion, doesn't make any difference at all, because if they work harder than anybody else, that's going to get them farther in the long run. I didn't have any of those skills when I came out of Fairfield Union High School. I never had a private lesson on my trombone. I never had a music lesson with anybody. I liked it, and I had worked pretty hard, probably because of the values I learned on the farm. I got to college that first year. I was having a good time. I was in a band. We were traveling a lot. And I remember getting that first music theory test back, and I probably had a D on it. I'd never had a D in my life. And And I'm about ready to cry because my professor is standing in front of the room passing the papers back, and he says, now, you knuckleheads that got a D or a C on this test, you got to really think about why you're here, and on and on and on and on. And all I can think about is, oh, my God, I got to go home and tell my dad I'm going to flunk out of this place, and I haven't even been here a full quarter yet, you know. And but the professor stops and says, I will come back on Tuesday and Thursday night at 7 o'clock, and I'll teach you knuckleheads all over again, but you got to be here. I'll make sure you get this information, and you'll get it in your head. So, of course, I went. I was there. And that professor, by the way, is the one that hired me to teach at OUL.
Right.
I love that man. He taught me how, not only music theory, but he taught me how to work and how to survive. So 4 years later, there were about 14 of us that got music ed degrees in 1972. And who do you think those 14 were? The knuckleheads out of his theory class. Because what happened to the kid that came from I remember the kids coming from the suburbs of Cleveland and Columbus and Cincinnati and all, and they're, well, what do you play? Oh, I play this, you know, naming instruments that I didn't even know what they were, like the bassoon and things. Well, yeah, you know. Well, what happened in the sophomore year when things got hard and they didn't know what was, it had reached their plateau, they didn't know how to deal with it, and they quit. They went someplace else. We never heard from them again.
Right.
Yet those of us that were learning grit, how to stick with it, how to persevere, plugging along and eventually, you know, earned the degrees and went on to great careers.
I cannot emphasize how important struggling to accomplish something really is for a person.
It burns it in your mind.
But here's the key. I was struggling, and he was right behind me the whole time. I had no idea that he was going to be, I was not aware. I should have been more aware of what a mentor in my life was doing for me at that point.
We always see it in retrospect.
And then what did he do for me then 10 years later? You know, he obviously respected me enough to have confidence to say, would you like a job? Mm-hmm. Without ever dealing anything else, talking about anything else. So then when I did my doctorate, finished that, you know, you have to go through that oral defense, and you have to have somebody participate on your doctoral team. And this is now 1992. So I've been out of school for 20 years. And, of course, the professors on your team or your committee are from the College of Education, but you get to select, you're supposed to select somebody from outside the College of Education. So who do I think of first? Jim Stewart. I said, would you be on my doctoral committee? He says, I'd love to. I don't think he ever read anything. I don't think he probably ever looked at what I did, but he was there the whole time and just smiling at me and like, I got your back. I got your back. You're going to do this.
Yeah.
And he did, and you know he's been that way in my life ever since. So having grit is an important concept, but the kids have got to be able to develop a relationship with somebody, and that's why I still teach, because I feel like I'm in that role of being able to somehow click with some of them, not all of them, but some of them, and turn around and give to them what Jim Stewart and Bob Trokey and a lot of other people gave to me, and I hope I can do that until I'm no longer effective. But Eric, you mentioned the concept of grit. So there's another piece to this now that I'm discovering, and it's called ACEs. So ACEs is an acronym that stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And this is so there was a study that was conducted in California, in San Diego area in 1997 with Kaiser Permanente employees, this big insurance company. They were going to get physicals. And the physicians that were giving these physicals started asking them questions about what had happened, what had they experienced when they were birthed to age 18. So they started to discover a lot of commonalities that, and they actually came up with a ACE quiz that you could take. So I'm thinking about this now as I'm reading this research about my principal hat, but also my music hat and my teaching hat, all these issues. So as a principal, I would be compelled by law to call Children's Services on any child that we suspected was being abused or neglected.
Sure. Yep. And
there are 5 categories for that. I'm not going to get them all right off the top of my head, but you've got physical abuse, mental abuse, and sexual abuse, and then physical and mental neglect. But then it goes further than that. So if the 6th category, or the 6th point that you could get on this ACE score would be if your parents are divorced or never married. Well, right away in my classes at OUL, that's probably half the class.
At least, yeah.
Never married or divorced. So, okay. The 7th one would be if you're between the age of the time you were born to the age of 18, did you ever see your mother treated violently? Was she ever yelled at, kicked, screamed, anything like that the kid experienced? Well, quite often, if there's been a divorce and it's not not amicable, then the mother could have been the one, and the kid sees that. So there's 2. They've got a score of 2. Children's Services never knows this, but they've got a score of 2. Okay, why would a man treat a woman like that? Beat her in front of a kid, probably because of mental illness of some kind, anxiety, depression, whatever. So there could be 3. And in our society today, the 4th one is very prevalent, and it's drugs. The opiate particularly makes that substance abuse, whether alcohol or drugs or whatever, is 4.
Yep.
And then the 5th one that you could get is to have somebody in your family that's been in prison. And when I was a principal, kids would all the time talking about going to visit this uncle or this dad or whatever in prison. So you could easily have a score of 5, and Children's Services would have never been involved in your family. So I'm thinking back now, looking at my kids that I'm teaching at OUL, those ones that I told you before, they just sit there like this, don't move, stoic ones I call them. Once I bring this up, and when I talk about this in my classes, my education class, or even in a rock and roll class, it's dead silence in the room because they're reflecting on what they
everybody's doing the math.
They are.
Yep, in their head.
And then afterwards, you may have those conversations where, this finally comes out. I equate it to smashing my thumb when I was back on the farm. You get it caught in something, and it's just the pressure and the pain is there constantly. And that's what's happening with these kids. So when you can drill a hole through that nail and let that blood go through, then you can release it, and all of a sudden the pressure is gone and you can actually talk about things again. Those are the kind of conversations I have with some students that have those real high ACE scores. But the reason this is important is that now these doctors are seeing 20 years later that people are coming in to their offices in their 30s or 40s and their 50s, and they've got all kinds of diseases and all kinds of adult problems, and they don't know what's causing this. And now they're able to go back and figure out it's all because of the way the body internalized stress at an early age and has never been able to heal itself. And it's causing intestinal problems, it's causing cancer, it's causing high blood pressure, it's causing all the things that we are, diabetes, the list goes on and on and on. But when the doctors can finally understand that it's not diabetes necessarily that they have to heal, it has to be stress, the heal the body, and they know how to do this. The medical people now are getting all over it. But what do I do as a teacher? What do I do with potential teachers that I'm training that are going to go out and talk to a 7th grader that doesn't understand this? And how do we get the entire country to come together to understand what medicine is now telling us is happening, how we can hopefully prevent that from ever happening in a family in the first place? But what goes on in your house behind closed doors is a freedom that we have in this country, I guess, to do whatever we want. But if we realize what's happening with kids, and as educators, it comes to us in the door. We have to be able to deal with those kids in some way. That's what I'm working on right now, trying to figure out ways to make that understood and to be what's beneficial for kids and for teachers too.
Educators, it's funny because educators are sort of stuck in this weird position where they seem to get all of the blame but have none of the actual tools to be able to fix the stuff that's coming to school, not the stuff that happens necessarily at school, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, and like you said, yes, I mean, it very much, we live in this free country, right? And you're supposed to be able to do what you want in your own home and these kinds of things. But having said that, though, isn't that really cultural, though? That whole dynamic that you're talking about. These types of issues don't exist in every civilized country around the world.
Well,
you know what I mean? There's
they wouldn't be
differences.
allowed to exist. But that takes you back into the rock and roll debate that I'm going to have.
Okay.
Lead in a couple of weeks is that yes, there's half the country if it's half and half. There's half the country that would have said clear back in the beginning that with rock and roll, that as Mitch Miller and some people said, this is filth entertainment. This is no value to this at all. That
The corrupt society.
yeah, Elvis shaking his pelvis was vulgar and should have never been put on TV. So there's always been those people that say we're going down a hole here that we don't want to go, and others are saying I have the right to go down that hole if I want to go, and it gets the class usually really riled up sometimes when they have to say that they don't like this or they do like it, and they're looking there talking about somebody they sit in class with all the time, when they actually have to confront what they really believe.
Yeah.
And sometimes for some students that's very hard to do. And it's very hard to do maybe when you're 18 years old. I don't know if I could have done it when I was 18 years old, but they do it and they enjoy it after it's all over with. They say that was the best part of the class.
Right.
But it's making them think about it at the time that's tough.
And articulate it.
And to articulate it without saying like and all the things.
Just to express and how they feel.
Especially when they're in an area just like we are, where they're sitting there face to face and somebody's right across the table from you and starts to challenge you on your thoughts. And for some of them that's hard, but that's also something they need to do the rest of their lives. Yeah. So they might as well learn how to do it. But it brings us back to that conflict. And frankly, even though it's tough and probably we've created a culture that probably has elements of it that is not very healthy for us, I'd rather live in a country where there is conflict than I would rather being in Russia where I'm not allowed to say something.
Or allowed to have an opinion, period.
Yes. Yeah. But if I don't think the same way, then I could be killed for it. So, I think that there are obviously problems with it, and I think that we will have ways of being able to work with this. But particularly my teachers who are just starting in their journey of becoming a teacher, it will take them 4 years. When they get out into the world, they're going to have to know everything they can about ACEs, all of its effects, what they can and cannot do as teachers, what they need to do with parents, how the medical community needs to be working with us, how the social work community needs to be working with us, how the faith community needs to be working with us. This is a societal problem. By the way, this is not anything that's directed just toward poor kids. This is not anything that's directed toward rich kids. It's everywhere, and it's in every community.
I agree.
So
I have a theory that as we continue to apply the same models of solutions that we've tried to apply in places like inner cities to now the suburbs, I find it remarkable that the exact same problems now are matriculating into the suburbs. You follow what I'm saying? Like, I mean, when you look at how many kids in this community or any of these suburbs of Ohio, those bracelets, they don't care whether you're white or black anymore. No. They don't care.
I'm reading a book called When Grit Is Not Enough. Eric, you mentioned about grit. So it's by a high school principal from an art school in Boston. And she's writing this book talking about all of her students that have gone on to college. She prided herself in saying, that 90% of our students will go on to college. And they might have been able to do that, but then they get to college and they can't support themselves. They fall flat on their face and they're back home. Things like the kid gets a scholarship. Now in art school, you're talking about music, you're talking about art, you're talking about anything like that. So let's say you get a free ride to a music school, but you're coming out of Boston and you're poor. You probably have a high ACE score, and you're probably not having any support from your family. You are poor, probably very much poor. So you get this free ride. Well, when you get the free ride and you go off across state in Massachusetts to a university, and you don't know that you've got to fill out the FAFSA at a certain time, or you got to do this, or you got to, all the things that happen in college that nobody really tells you about. And these kids, so is grit going to really help that? I could tell you got to work harder, but if you don't even know what you're supposed to do,
that's
then
absolutely true.
I feel like I'm whipping you on the back. Do more. And you look around at me like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Yeah. So it's made me think about the whole concept of grit differently with ACEs. Not that I'm saying that grit isn't important, because if you're going to succeed in this world, you've got to know how to work. And I learned that on a farm. But you've also got to have an awareness that not everybody is like you in this world. Not everybody had the opportunity to grow up on a farm. Not everybody has a 0 ACE score. So we've got to figure out ways to help people from different backgrounds, different ways. I see it at our little campus at Ohio University Lancaster, where all the problems that I'm reading about that occur in every place in the world still happen here. And what can I do to bring my colleagues along to understand it so that we can make kids successful? And
Now, see, part of what you've done is you've got a couple of books that you wrote. I'm assuming that you address a lot of these issues in these books, right?
these are, this is my first book that I wrote when I was a principal. It was You've Got to Go to School, You're the Principal. It was just common sense tips for for a principal. But you would think by the time you became a principal that you've already accomplished some of that grit story.
Yeah.
Yet sometimes even the people who got to the principal's office didn't always have some of the common sense things you should know to do. So it was my way of
Softening the blow.
well, kind of my way
Reducing the crash. I'm sorry.
Actually, in many ways, these are my ways of 100. Both of them actually have 101 tips of just common sense things that people should know to be successful. Much of what I've incorporated into that lecture that I give to students on the first day of class. Here, if you want to be successful, heads up, listen, try to do these things, figure out what works for you in your own way. And I guarantee you, if you try to do this, that you're probably going to be more successful than what you would be if you didn't have somebody tell you this.
I can say that in my experience up there, there's been a variation in teachers who, while they are teaching class, that carries that work ethic in with them, but there hasn't been any professor up there who, if I had to ask a question or if another student had to ask a question, that they didn't make themselves absolutely readily available for as long as that student needs to learn something. I mean, that being said, there are professors who don't care if you show up for their class and don't keep attendance and anything, but I think that that's okay as long as if you're struggling in that class and you're attending and you need a little more help, that they're there to help you do that, and all of them have been very supportive.
But if you take that onto a bigger campus where you're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times bigger than we are, and it's not a campus that's sort of confined like our little building is. If you go to the Athens campus, you got a building over here, you got a building on the other side of town. They're all over the place. The coordination of all that is tough. Hopefully, within your major, you'll find that. But I just pray that every kid finds somebody and reaches out, and there's a responsibility on the kid too to look for that mentor in your life that's going to be there no matter what. It's going to tell you that you're sucking up right now and you better listen, but it's going to be there having your back when you need them, just in the way of support. I have mentors in my life that I could call anytime, any hour, any moment and say, hey, what's going on here? And that's the only way I survived the principalship, and that's kind of what I'm trying to tell people in here. Find somebody somewhere that you can talk to that's outside your school about personal issues where you're doubting yourself, that you just need to have somebody help you. And sometimes it's just that talking is that relieving that pressure that's been building there. It's the kids who won't talk to me in my classes that bother me the most, because I know you can see it's there. The indicators are being visibly seen in class, but for some reason they've got maybe there's a blame and shame going on in their heads where they can't get over that. By the time you're 18, hopefully you will. But I hope that we have teachers in the future that are going to be able to help kids in middle school start to talk about their feelings, bring those things out, know what to do. And here's the thing for educators, as you were mentioning, we get it all. I could easily, when a kid tells me that I've looked at your ACE things and I've got a score of 5, I'm at high risk, I could easily say, well, you got to go talk to a counselor. Well, the kid doesn't want to go talk to a counselor. Who do they have a relationship with? They have it with me.
Right.
Because they're talking to me about this. Maybe eventually, yes, but not right. You don't just refer that off to a counselor.
Yeah.
And that happens in college, too. My students don't want to go talk to a counselor. They don't know who the counselor is. They know me. If they've finally been able to open up to me and talk to me about some of this, then...
And you just dismiss them in that way. It makes them feel like they're not worthy of even seeking the help from the counselor.
But I have a lot of colleagues that are saying, Paul, you're going down a wrong path here. You're going down something that you don't want to do that could be... I mean, what are you gonna do if that kid goes home and commits suicide or something? Well, I guess I've always had that risk.
That's that litigious, sterile world that people are so terrified to reach out to each other, to help each other. And back to what you were saying, don't you find though that in just life in general, when you look at people that have had any kind of success or accomplishment at something, there always seems to be that cog in the chain somewhere that was the break that someone gave them. Was like, hey man, I'll help you out here. I see what you're trying to do. You know what I mean? There always seems to be that in almost every example that someone helped them out.
I'm going through that right now.
That's the classic story of Elvis Presley. Which the kids don't know anything about Elvis Presley's history. They don't know that his father was in jail.
Well, they've seen Lilo and Stitch.
What's that?
They've seen Lilo and Stitch.
Well, yeah, but
they know his music, but
they
right.
But when they realize, that Elvis was a shy boy just driving a truck in Memphis and drove around the block where Sun Studios was several times, not having the confidence necessary to go in and even make his demo record for his mother, and when he did. He was still just making a demo for his record, but if it hadn't been for Sam Phillips that actually heard what was going on, probably just like we are, had headsets going on, hearing what's going on in that studio. Yeah. It says, I hear something different, nobody else knows, and played a key role in his life. So when those moments happen, I hope the students are open to that, but I hope the people that are hearing it and seeing things in kids that kids don't know they have yet, that we're able to continue to do that. If we lose educators who are willing to do that, then that is a real concern for this country.
There's definitely a need for. You can't automate education.
No.
Okay. There's still got to be some sort of individual. There's something that happens there, right? Now, yeah, you can go and watch YouTube videos and animations and stuff like this till your head explodes. But to really understand a subject, you got to hear it from somebody that has a passion for it too. Yep. To get that transference of knowledge, So I get where you're coming from. Absolutely.
Last night I was out with some friends and, some of them are educators and they're working with kids here in town. And, they were saying to me that kids just don't want to do anything. They don't want to do anything. They won't do anything at all. And I listened and I'm thinking if I was back in that role again, would that be good enough for me? And I would hope that I would be able to figure out some way, something within me that could motivate a kid to want to do something. I don't know, I'm struggling with that thought right now. I thought about it all night. What about those kids that just don't want to do anything? Yeah. But I come back to my music training. Music has this power. The Greeks figured it out way back, thousands of years ago with the doctrine of ethos that music has this power to make you think different things. It can make This was also used by the people when rock and roll was starting. They went back to this doctrine and said, this music can be dangerous to some people. It can change your soul. Right. It can change the way you think, or it can also be very, very good. So a lot of medical people now are realizing that music is the soothing part that's going to help these kids reduce the stress that they've lived with. But also the research is clearly showing right now, and if there's any parents listening to this, I would hope they would heads up right now, that if you got a fifth grader and you want your kid in your fifth grade to succeed and make it through the next 7 years of school to get through high school, that participating in a band or an orchestra or a choir is a ticket to get that kid through. The research is everywhere that the kids that are participating in extracurricular activities, particularly in the arts, when they graduate from high school and then go on to college, are much more likely to make it through that first semester of college because they've been coached. They've learned all those little things along the way that we've been talking about with grit and mindset and responsibility because they had to succeed. Going to college and doing what we expect them to do then becomes just part of it. Okay, I'm used to this. Yeah. When I look at the kids that come into our campus that have none of that, they've come out of high school and have a very slim record of participating in anything. then they're high at risk to me. I recognize that when I'm starting my campaign to get them to do this kind of stuff, that's a new thing to them. They've never had it, and they might push back. Sports would be good too. I'm not saying it's just music, but the music is consistent across time. Sports may only be seasonal, where it's just for a while,
Right.
and you got other issues. So there's a huge benefit, and music is something that you then can do the rest of your life too.
Yeah.
So it's almost like we could give you a pill that would make you healthy, and it's not really a pill. It's just participation in music.
Yeah.
So
And mentally healthy anyway.
yeah, and I'm certainly glad in my career that I had the opportunity to have my feet firmly planted in both worlds. I never really abandoned my music part because of my luck in being able to teach at the college level. But boy, my music teachers when I was a principal were my go-to people, because when I had kids that were somewhat struggling, those music teachers somehow had the way to make a connection with kids, a relationship with kids. They found them instruments and they played, and they went on through school and succeeded, and have gone on to life for most of them and succeeded too.
Yeah. It helps if you're in one or two school systems too. I went to 13 different schools growing up from kindergarten to
How's that on the
graduation.
ACE score? Is that a check?
I couldn't make
Is that-
connections with any teachers other than grade wise.
Well, but look what you've done though. Look how you've made it.
Yeah.
So
It's been the best thing I've ever done, man. It's the best and coolest thing that I've ever done. I used to think the coolest thing was that Wikipedia existed, and if I ever had a question, I could wake up and just, ask Wikipedia. But man, talking to professors with experience and knowledge, and having them care to tell you what's important about the experience and show you the direct path to the knowledge, that's a high, man.
Yeah.
I could do that
It's
forever.
it's a cheat code. It's like a cheat code in a video game.
Like working in the library, man. I every day I work in the library. I'm like, man, this is the coolest thing ever. I'm surrounded by books everywhere, and then I just have to not be distracted by the titles on the spines.
Though, I think that someone that has learned to play a musical instrument or learned music at any kind of competency, fill in the blank with what you want that to mean. There's something, though, that happens when you do that. You sort of learn there's a formula to learning stuff. When you forced your way through on a musical instrument, you when you look back and you go, oh, wait a minute, I get this. Mm-hmm. It's a lot about this. It's just about time and repetition. Okay, so now I accept that. So I think someone that's learned a musical instrument can move on to learn anything else, because once you've learned how to do that, you know how to learn, period. You know how to teach yourself something.
And it goes right back to the piano. The piano is the one that does it the best.
Yeah.
The piano, because look what you're doing. You got your eyes involved. You got your ears involved. You got both hands involved. You got your foot involved with the pedal. Organ would be even better, but you got a lot of stuff happening at the same time. And when the kids are 5 years old, their brains. So here you go back to the ACE thing again. If the kids' brain cells are developing at a very, very rapid age from the time they're born, if that ACE experience is happening to them, say at 2 years old, that's when some of your brain cells are opening up, sort of like a flower in the spring. It opens up, the petals open. Well, if there's a ACE experience, sometimes that cell will close back up again and never really develop. So we're learning now from the medical field that the brain, in some cases, of some of these kids that we're seeing, never gets developed in the right way.
Right.
It doesn't mean that it can't be done eventually, but if it's not developed in a right way, then the body will try to heal itself in its own way and come up with all kinds of weird ways of doing it. And in some cases, if it doesn't develop the right way, then it will also develop these diseases that we're experiencing.
Yeah.
But the child's brain playing piano is wired so differently, because these cells, these responses that we need to make with our fingers, it's wired, and it's wired
Physically changes your brain.
It does, and there's a lot of research now showing that. So when I was a band director, we'd have in situations in school. One of those assemblies, in particular, was the Honor Society of Tapping, and at a high school. So I'd have my small band there to perform music for that, and usually when they would do the tapping ceremony, half my band was up on the stage, because they were the kids that that music background had helped them do exactly what you say. And always anybody who studied piano was always a better reader than anybody who had not.
Yeah, I could read 2 lines at the same time because you got to read left
have
and right hand.
They have the discipline. They've learned the discipline to stick with it. There's no instrument better to teach grit than the piano. And if you're a parent and you will make the determination not to let your kid quit when they start to lose interest, because there'll always be those ups and downs with that. If you persevere as a parent, hold to your ground and make sure the kid continues to study weekly from the time that they are, I'd say, 5 years old. From the time those little fingers are old enough to sit at the piano, and if you would make that child take a lesson, I know this is costly, but man, it's an investment that, trust me, will get you results at the end. When the kid takes off to go to college, that kid will probably want to continue to take lessons anyway. And I'm not talking about becoming a music major. I'm talking about just enjoying the world of music, always being able to play for enjoyment. You'll always be the life of the party because you can sit down and play piano for everybody else.
And it's infinite. It's infinite.
Yeah.
You can do so much with it. I mean, I got tripped out by sound design early on and then taught myself how to play piano. And then now I'm getting into music, and so
music theory,
music theory and writing and stuff. And I don't know, I couldn't say enough about it. I mean, I couldn't stop.
And that well never ends.
No,
that's the great thing about it. It just keeps going.
I would certainly be incomplete and irritated if I couldn't write music.
I think that because I'm a failure at high school music or school music, in that I tried trumpet and never finished, and then subsequently tried percussion and never finished. And it wasn't until after the military, years later, really, that I finally picked up an instrument that related to me, and taught myself how to actually play it, and taught myself music theory and things. The problem when I look back, though, at what my experience was in school was that I could not find a way to relate to hot cross buns and 1, 2, 3, parrot. Okay, let's do it again for another 30 minutes. Why am I doing this? Right? I could never find a way to connect to it. So, but now it's funny because retrospectively, I use every bit of that.
Yeah.
Like all that stuff I didn't think I was learning, I was actually learning.
Yeah.
And I would just hope that we'd have music teachers along the way that could help make that relevant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and look, it wasn't really fair. 45 minutes once a week. I mean, how do you compete? There's no way that I was going to learn an instrument in a reasonable fashion. Like you said, you need less. You should really take the dive. And
that's not going to happen in today's world, because if the kids are living in poverty, that money's not going to be available.
That's right.
So we got to figure out different ways to provide that experience for kids. In different ways. I guess when I'm idealistically saying that, it's in your mind, the kid that's growing up where there's a mom and a dad, and you've got enough means to be able to do that. All right, for the families for the kids who are growing up in situations where that's not there, then that needs to be provided in some other way from the community, from the school, from whatever. When I was at West School here in Lancaster was the toughest one. I'll never forget the day that my superintendent came to Medill on the other side of town, and which is where the doctors, lawyers, bankers, and stuff were sending their kids to West. He says, "You're going to be the principal at West School next year." I said, "What did I do wrong?" And I was not. I mean, I went because I had to, because I wasn't able to retire yet. But it turned out to be the best professional experience I ever had in my life, because figuring out what to do, how to help kids that are less privileged be successful, and a lot of that relied back on my music background. I hired a music teacher that was absolutely tremendous. She could teach anybody music. We had a community come support us and develop the West After School Center, which gave our kids extra time and a safe place to be after school that they didn't have, and in the summer. And that was tremendous. But we got a grant from Mr. Holland's Opus. Mr. Holland, the movie?
Yeah, great movie.
Had a foundation that, you could apply. So we just took a shot, let's write for $10,000 worth of cheap band instruments just for us at our little school. We got it. We bought all kinds of flutes, clarinets. I don't know where those instruments are, but we gave them to kids. We said, here, play. We had more kids playing music out of West School during that era than any place else. And most of them went on through the high school. Kids that would have never played before, but they made it through. And they're living proof of what I just said before. If you stick with it. And she made sure she stuck with it.
Such a cheap investment considering the alternative.
We would solve a lot of problems in this country right now if we just made every kid play an instrument.
It's funny. I was
and the money for that isn't very forthcoming to schools and stuff. There's not a huge budget for that.
There are a lot of people in this community. If we knew that was if we could market that in such a way. They have cheap trumpets and flutes and things sitting in their closet someplace that they haven't played in 20 years.
Right.
They could be brought back out, given to us.
Refurbished.
Oh, there's a 503c3 or whatever that is in there somewhere.
I'm
You're
sure
right. There's got to be.
And the West After School Center was that 501c3.
Yeah.
So we were able to do that. Even though it was benefiting one school, we were able to do it through the auspices of the After School Center and do it under a nonprofit group. And so, it's... all those things, I've been fortunate enough to experience and be involved in and do and work with other people to make happen. But it comes back to this, that music is a key part of life. It always has been. It's a good way of It's a good way that humans communicate with each other. It can't be. You can't talk about anything in American society without talking about it, which I think is why the rock and roll class is an important one. But right now, we're on a cusp of seeing a lot of people cut that out of your programs in school because of money, at a time when we should be rethinking about putting it back into the schools, because the medical people are right ready to share with us all the benefits that music has for ACEs, for any aspect of life. Treating Alzheimer's patients right now.
Yep.
And I don't know if you know it or not, but the OU School of Music has one of the best music therapy programs in the country.
No, I didn't know that.
It's a little kept secret down there in Athens, but there's a lot of people that go there to study music therapy, and they're coming out and finding jobs in mental hospitals. They're finding jobs working in with senior citizens. Cleveland Clinic grabs a lot of them, takes them up there.
That's really interesting.
We're gonna find out that music therapy is just as helpful as physical therapy in healing any kind of parts of the, of the body that need healing. So,
speaking to that, I'm gonna botch this a little bit, but have you heard of? I don't know if you can call it a theory or not, but where they're retuning the keyboards to be universal harmonically correct. Instead of A being at 440, A goes down to something like
400, right?
Or 422 or something like that.
I've heard of this.
It's supposed to be in harmony. Like if you rewrite everything, it's supposed to
resonate with the natural frequencies
of the universe
and make chakras or something.
Have you heard of that? And if you have, what do you think about that?
No, I haven't heard of it. It almost sounds like you're going back to talk about Bach's well-tempered clavier. Back at the time when Bach was alive, Johann Sebastian Bach, the piano, the keyboard didn't have the 88 keys that we're used to seeing today. It had little keys in between there, which there were these
like semitones,
I guess quarter tones or whatever. And it was so complicated, and it was done differently in every part of the world, so it made no sense at all. So what might be in the key of G in Germany might be in the key of E flat someplace. It just didn't make any sense. And Bach sort of standardized that. So he sort of standardized the tuning of the keyboard, and then the A became the 440, and it's sort of established ever since. So to go something different, it wouldn't surprise me that somebody would want to do that.
But the surprising thing is that it will bring you into universal harmony. That's the surprising thing. To me. Not that music doesn't do that for me anyway. I don't know what I'm going to gain by this, but but there's people that say, that's a big thing.
That's
where I would come to somebody like you when I wanted to find out somebody that wants something like that's really a niche. I'd go to somebody like Eric Smith, and he'd tell me he has this brain.
That's why we call him. Yeah, the dark wizard of knowledge.
The day that he came to me and says, "Hey, I want you to listen to these CDs that I'm making," and I'm thinking, CDs, what? And then I take them home and listen to them, and I go, "Oh, where's this kid been?"
Right.
Why did that? And I go back as a teacher. I'm thinking, how did I miss it? How did I miss that? and how much am I missing from some of the other students that present themselves in such a way that I might not know that they even have in their own private life, they're doing these things that I don't know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, he's pretty interesting. I love having him as my partner because I get a professional sound engineer as part of the equation. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's great stuff. Yeah.
I know I brought I brought my folder up today. I grabbed the wrong one. He says, "Did you bring the calendar up?" Which is like where our guests are coming on. I'm like, "No, I brought that some journals up on ORCO-R," which is short for Orchestrated Reduction of Quantum Entangled Information Microtubulars in the Brain. But you can't even find books on it. And I work in a library, and I'm like, we have no books in our Ohio Link or Alice library on any of this. The only thing I could find was journals written by the two people who came up with the theory, Roger Penrose and Stuart Hammerhoff. And so it's
like quantum physics, and he's a history guy, right? He's
Yeah.
a history major. It's like, what?
Man.
yeah, it's good stuff, though. I mean, I talk with people about this, and they'll say, "What are you majoring in?" History.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Not physics, huh? No.
Amazing.
But, it's good stuff, man. That's what I say. Like, the pursuit of knowledge is a high.
You're going to make us all famous someday.
I sure hope so.
I don't know about that. I love it.
That's really cool.
I can't wait to work on my master's, man. I think I got one more semester, and aside from truly feeling like I'm going to miss everybody, because I mean, I talk with all my professors and my bosses that I work for and the faculty there. I know them all, and I enjoy them all, and I enjoy just being there. It's going to be like really weird to go down to Athens, and it's going to be huge and diverse.
A whole new group of people.
Well, I don't mind the group of people. I can make friends. It's just I'm just gonna miss the other place that I've been to for 4 years.
Now, here's what you have to remember: that when my daughter went off to, my oldest daughter is a musician. She got the gene, I think, and I think my dad would be pretty proud that she's playing this. As the principal oboist of the Milwaukee Symphony. So she made it, but it was probably because of my wife, because anyway. When she went off to Eastman School of Music, which is one of the best in the country, we were wondering how did our daughter get into this, but we made it happen. And when she graduated, I mean, the professor that she had, there when you go to that school, you're there to study with your oboe teacher. Your teacher, you and your teacher have 4 years to really click and make things work if you want a career in your life. And Katie made that with him. Dr. Kilmer is his name. So when she graduated and we were there for her last concert, I wanted to say to him, I wanted to say thank you very much. And he says, nope, don't go there. He says, this isn't the end. This is just the beginning. And he's been in her life as her mentor ever since. And she's been out there now for more than probably close to 20 years. And every so often, it's not where they talk to each other daily, but if she has a student that has potential to go there, obviously they talk, and he'll call her and consult her on things now as a true professional. And you will do the same thing. You've not had that experience yet, but you'll find out that there will be those people in your life that will always be there for you, or should always be there for you. And it won't be as you're the student now. You're the equal. You've got to where you're going to be, and you will be able to have those kind of conversations on a whole nother level, but those people will never be out of your lives, ever, unless you choose to let that happen. If you choose to just let those relationships die, or if your professors choose to let them die. That's the key part about mentoring that I keep talking about with my students is, if I'm your mentor and you're my mentee, we both have a role in this. I've got a role to give you what I think is the best guidance and advice that I can from my years of experience in it. You have a responsibility to listen, but you have a responsibility to call me when you're about ready to go over the cliff.
Right.
And because it's going to honk me off if I find out that you were stressing over something and never bothered to call me or text me or email me or whatever. Don't worry. Don't make the same mistake I made. I did it too many times. I'd be frustrated about something at school, and I'd go home and I'd take it out on my family inadvertently, and then I would eventually get around to calling my mentor, and they'd say, "Why didn't you talk to me about this weeks before?"
Yeah, because
it saved you this, that, and the other thing.
Everybody would have saved a lot of time.
Yep.
I wouldn't have done a lot of stupid things. So yes, that's the relationship that that's the level you're going to be at.
That sounds great.
Mark my words, you're going to see it.
Just the beginning.
Yeah, I was just feeling like, I don't know, I was feeling lonely yesterday, kind of weirdly in the world and stuff. And but I know that's not true. I have a lot of really close people. They're not related to me, but they're more my family than DNA would ever be able to bring them forth.
It's a different kind of a relationship. And if you're a smart student listening to this, you say, okay, I have to do something differently than, and how do you do that? You talk to somebody like you. How do you survive as a student? What'd you learn? Just talk to people. Don't
be afraid of the world, people. The world is yours to make it better for everyone else. Don't fear it. Integrate with it.
If Generation Z has one weakness, though, it's that they are afraid to sometimes reach out to that. If they can't get it through their phones, and they're going to miss out on some of that talking. I make my students come to my class. They put their phones down. They have to talk to each other.
Yeah.
They have to know each other's names. I hate it when they sit in the hallway and just sit there and beside each other, and they'll line up the whole hallway, and they'll all be sitting there looking at their little phones.
Oh, yeah.
And if they could just be talking to somebody.
I'll walk out of a classroom if I come in early and there's 4 or 5 people in there just staring at their phone. I just can't take it. I just walk out into the hall.
So it's like this weird cult type thing.
Yeah. It's like they're connected visually to something, and you can almost see the alpha waves just.
But I try to make it there before kids come. Maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes before class.
That way.
And then I facilitate that. I say, put the phones down, talk to each other, and then after half a semester, they
don't even think about it anymore.
They become a family.
Yeah.
And then they have friends, and they like that.
Yeah.
But they've not been conditioned for that. They have to be taught to do that.
Well, the cell phone, I used to travel a lot for business, has become this interesting, and the earbuds has become this interesting filtering system now with which, like, look, I don't want to be bugged. I don't want to talk to you about your great Aunt Eunice while we're on this 4.5-hour flight. Yeah. So first thing I do, throw the headphones in, put the phone on, sit there and close my eyes. It's sort of a way to tell the world, I don't want to deal with you, you know what I mean, or I don't want to interact, kind of thing.
It's also one of the reasons why the podcasts work so well, because it's long form conversation. It gives people time to articulate and orate what they are trying to express, and then of course you can download all these for free on iTunes, put them in your phone, and it's very convenient to listen to a conversation in that fashion.
Hey, I use it too. I'm not saying don't do it.
Yeah.
But there are times and places
Yeah.
that would be much more beneficial to a student to put it in your pocket and not look at it. And that's when you're sitting in a college classroom and it's class is going to start.
That you're paying for.
Someone's paying for it.
Class is going to start at 5 minutes. And if you would know something about the person you're sitting right next to, it just might make this experience more fun.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was just, 3 weeks ago that I was in Wendy's having lunch. It was, I think, right after a podcast that we had recorded. And there was this guy, he's an older guy, he was sitting by himself over in the way, and I was sitting by myself, so I had taken a bite out of my hamburger, and I got up, and I said, "Excuse me, sir, would you care for some company with your lunch?" And he said, "Yeah." We had an impromptu conversation about theology and life and all this stuff, and at the end, I got a picture with him. I said, "Is it cool if I take a picture with you?" And he's like, "Yeah." And which, I can't hardly not do that, man. If I see someone just sitting by themselves, I want to go up and just talk to them. I mean, I love talking to people, so, and I'm absolutely, as you know, not intimidated to be in front of any group of people.
No.
Not at all. I would be there the whole class doing that if that was available. I love just talking to people.
And that's different because of the age you are. If you're 18 years old, that's a different stage in life, and that is tough. But it's also the age in life where you need to grow up and start to learn to do those things.
It's fine. I
take risks.
I can't get on the bandwagon with the bash and the younger people because I just think of the train wreck of a human being I was at 18 years old, I look at my kids and I'm like, nah, they're doing all right. Yeah, we're good.
Yeah.
I don't change much, man. Everything I did at 18, I pretty much still do. All the things I was interested in, I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, I can't. Once I pick an interest up in something, man, I don't ever let it go. I never have.
Joining the military will change you. That's what happened to me. That's like getting taken off the leash.
Speaking of the military, can I talk about one more thing?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Please.
Yeah.
All right. You need to read a book, if you haven't read it, called Hillbilly Elegy.
I've heard of this book several times.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've never heard of it.
Oh, you got to get this book and read
Yep.
it.
Okay.
It could be your life. It could be your. You could tell the story too. J.D. Vance is the author. He is recalling his. Basically, it's a memoir of his life. He's only about 31. Well, he's probably 33, 34 now, maybe mid-30s. No older than that. And he grew up in. His family grew up in. I think it's Jackson, Kentucky, if I remember correctly. But he actually grew up in Middletown, Ohio. So he's a Buckeye. And his grandma, who he calls Mama, and his grandfather were the Kentuckians. And somewhere along the line, the family came to Ohio, to Middletown, because there were steel factories, I think, there at the time for better jobs. And then when the steel factories closed, it's the same story. We have all out throughout the Midwest about the decline of the industrial. The same thing happens here in Lancaster when Anchor Hocking went down. So it's the same kind of story. Matter of fact, there was
Glass City.
The Glass City was the other book that was very similar to that, written by somebody from our town. So anyway, back to J.D. and his story. He's talking about going through his growing up years. This kid had a high ACE score. It's everything that we're talking about is in this book. And he has an older sister, and of course his mother is raising the older sister and him, and his mother gets into drugs. Well, first of all, she gets pregnant with his older sister when she's about ready to graduate from high school. So she should have been the salutatorian, I believe, of Middletown. I think he says in the book, and she never really went through the ceremony because she's pregnant with the sister. And then she never really makes the relationship with the father. There's men in and out of the life, drugs in and out of the life. The only stable force in his life is his grandmother. But if you'd have gone up to the porch, in Grandma's porch, and if you didn't like her, she's packing guns. She'll shoot you if you don't. That's that hillbilly culture.
Appalachia.
Yeah, Appalachian hillbilly culture. So he talks about he is, though, still himself a pretty good student despite it all. He's able to learn. There's nothing wrong with him except the environment that he's growing up in. So he talks about graduating from Middletown High School and got accepted to go to Ohio State. He probably would have been one of those kids that if he would have gone to Ohio State at that time in his life would have probably fallen flat on his face because he wasn't ready to do that. He goes instead to the Marines somewhere. Some Marine recruiter got a hold of him before he was supposed to go to Ohio State and says, you need to come to the Marines instead. And if there's ever a book that's a credit to the military, you got to get this and read it because he says this is what they shaped my life up. You either do it or you die. And he shaped up, got out of there after his 4 years, and he talks about his experiences in Iraq and different places. And then he comes back and he goes to Ohio State, and he gets through there probably in a very, very challenging program, maybe in 2.5 years. I mean, he's able to accelerate.
Yep.
Then he gets accepted to Yale. And he goes off to Yale Law School. But he's still a hillbilly. He's talking about going off to all these fancy dinners and things that you have as a Yale Law student. He doesn't know when the waiter brings the wine list what the difference is between white wine, red wine, and he doesn't know those words.
Right.
He doesn't know any of that kind of stuff. So he is connected with a professor there named Amy Chow, who has written several books herself about. She's Chinese, growing up in Chinese in America, and you could just see her influence all over him as he writes this book. Right. So it comes out in the fall of 2016 or something like that. Well, summer of 2016, but it just predicted. He didn't really say anything about who was going to win the 2016 election, but he loudly said, he put the voice to what Middle America is saying, we want change. Mm-hmm. We want something different. And then look what happened with the outcome of the election.
Right.
So it's an interesting book, but it tells the story about the power of the military. God, if we ever lose the power of the military and their values of straightening out a lot of, kids, we're in big trouble.
It's the reason today that I'm an engineer.
Yep.
I mean, that's what catapulted me. And I've never taken an engineering class on a college campus in my life, but I work and owned my own engineering, air quotes, engineering company doing programming. But I went through the equivalent of a 4-year electrical engineering program in 7 months.
There you go.
And we failed out 80% of our class. It was like, see ya.
Yep.
You got, and a C was a failing grade. It wasn't like, it was C was a so. It was, I can remember marching. Of course, you still got to do all the boot camp stuff, and everybody kind of expects that. And then you get to school, and they told us in class that 80% of you are not going to make it through this program. It's like, what? Are you kidding me? And they were about right. I mean, well, actually, we graduated with a fair amount of our class, but I seen other classes just get like decimated, and they would have to take 3 classes and put them together to make one.
For the people that made it.
For the people that they'd thrown out. But we marched home from school one day where we had gone in mathematics from like 2 + 2 to, vector algebra in one day. And there were guys that were marching, and they're just crying because if you can't make it through school in the military, it's unforgiving, man. They just throw you to the fleet undesignated. I was in the Navy. So we used to call it, scraping paint and scrubbing shitters on the USS Never Dock. I mean, that's your career. That's 4 years now because we said rocked out of your training program. So it was a big deal, man. But man, does it like he says, that concept of you're going to succeed because if you don't, you're done, kind of thing. Having that stark, that goes back to The Art of War, where what was his name, Lao Tzu, the author of that, right? Where he talked about putting his men in, putting their back against the wall with no chance of escape, would turn one warrior into 5 because they knew they couldn't run. Do or die. So there is something about that, like jumping off the cliff and going, here we are, but we better figure it out or splat, Nope. You got anything else?
Oh, I probably have a lot, but I think we probably bored people enough for
for
this day. So.
Sometimes this is only an hour and a half. We've gone 3+ hours with people before. That's the beauty of podcasting, though. There's no limitations at all. Did you have fun?
I had a great time.
Well, we really enjoyed having you on the show.
Absolutely.
It was fantastic. I love it because it was just like, okay, just let him go. It was
awesome.
Excellent. Yeah, I was just sitting here mesmerized.
Not the way I really teach, though. I usually have a lesson plan, so it's kind of fun not to have a lesson plan.
Yeah, just go off on tangents and just talk about whatever seems to be relevant, and bring it back around to what we were talking about. That's great.
So I just can't imagine a life without music. I mean, I know my father didn't think it was such a good idea, but I'm glad I was probably a little persistent and did it anyway. I mean, when you get a piece of music and you open it up and you can understand everything on it, it's a whole aspect of life that a whole bunch of people in this country can't do. I can't imagine looking to be illiterate, to open up a book and not know what this meant.
Yeah.
I mean, it bothers me that I could not open up a book in French and understand what it was, because I would love to be able to have that ability where you could read in many languages. But music is just a part of that. And to open up a piece of music and not to understand what's there, and to see how many students that I have come through, our campus that are illiterate in that respect, that those who do, where I know that they're going to go on to, they could do all kinds of things in their life, as you said before. Their brains are wired differently.
Yep.
This isn't, if they've got this, then anything else beyond that's not going to be that much more difficult for them. They've mastered that ability, and I can't imagine my life without it. Fortunately, my wife is musically trained also, so we both understand it together.
That's cool.
We made sure our kids got that. Our grandkids, I already told my daughters and sons-in-law that when those kids are old enough, they will get a piano. If I have to buy it myself, as long as you just make sure they take lessons until they're 18 years old and trust the fact that that's probably going to work again.
Yeah.
So
it is a bit of a formula, a magic formula. That it absolutely is.
I know there are a lot of obstacles in making sure that you get the instrument, that you have but it's just, as an adult, deciding for your child that you want to make sure that they succeed, knowing what is going to work. A kid that's, I start a lot of kids on an instrument when they're 5th grade, on trombone or baritone or whatever. And, it's fun first because it's shiny, it's new, and everybody's doing it. And then after a while, it starts to get a little, that gets to be a routine. It's a big, you got to pack it around, you got to do this, and you got to go to rehearsals at school, and it may not be the most, it might be boring, but you got to stick with it, because when in the end, you play an instrument, if you could go off to Ohio State and march in that marching band, or go to Ohio University and march in that marching band, that's when you reap the rewards for what you put up with for all those younger years. And parents that go through with their kids and say, well, what's their choice? They can do whatever they want. Nah, come on, parents, think that through again. Think what you're a parent, and parents are supposed to make sure that their kids do things. If they start it, they need to finish it, and I hope that they'll.
I would say, and I agree with you 100%.
Start it, finish it.
I would also say to people that aren't in school, pick up a musical instrument. Start to go grab a guitar, grab something, a keyboard, a small keyboard. Start learning it, because it will help you no matter when you start learning how to do it. But having a parent that is a musician is, I think, your chance for success as a child becoming a musician is so much higher, in that when you've learned how to play a musical instrument yourself, you understand the sour notes, the crazy, there's going to be timing,
that
there's
helps,
all this
but
stuff.
It's also, if you're a farmer, your kids should be farmers. Huh?
Right.
That doesn't work so well either.
It does, but I think you're more tolerant of it.
You are.
I was trying to play scales on my trumpet. Man, people would be like, okay, give it a rest. We're done. or when I started playing percussion and things like that. If you've got a parent that plays those instruments, they don't care. They get it.
They'll maybe be there helping you.
Yeah.
Well, they could be, or be there helping you. Yeah, absolutely. So I think it makes a big difference. So I would encourage people, if you're an adult, you've never bothered to learn, you can. Yep. It's really not that hard. You just gotta spend the time to do it.
That's right.
Well, cool. We got anything else? If not, we'll wrap up here. Everybody good? It was a lot of fun. Thank you so much. I hope to have you back, Dr. Rock and Roll History, coming back on the show and talking to us about education and stuff. So thanks for listening, everybody. Make sure you hit the like or subscribe button down below. Go give us some love over on Facebook, and we'll catch you all next time.
Goodbye.